On this trip we're off to Lundy Island to visit 3 separate lighthouses there, and we're leaving from Ilfracombe on the MS Oldenburg. You can also leave from Bideford, both in North Devon. I'll be staying at Lundy South Lighthouse, which was built in 1897. The light is one white flash every 5 seconds. The foghorn was a super typhoon, one blast every 25 seconds. This place was automated in 1994, but I was lucky to arrive there whilst it was still manned by keepers. Then it will be on to Lundy Old Lighthouse, which was built in 1819 approximately. And the light had a flashing light at the top and a fixed light approximately 30 feet below the lantern. Then they also had another lantern at ground level. Then it will be on to Lundy North Lighthouse, built in 1897. The light was one white flash every 15 seconds. The foghorn was a 72 speaker electric tannoy, which was discontinued in 1988. Automated about 1991. Then it was monitored from Lundy South.
After that, I came home on a week's leave, and in those days the average supernumerary keeper in those days was away from home for about a year. And it wasn't this case of going out for a couple of months or going to a land station and then going home for a spell and then going back again. You more or less travel from one place to another. I certainly was away for about a year before I came home, but I left St Anne's and went straight to Swansea Depot, where I was told I had to go on to Lundy South for the relief. And I'd had no idea of what to get in the way of food. As you know, we had to take a month's food out at the time for Lundy South. And the ship was the Triton. Anyway, they told me the greengrocer where the keepers went and got their food, and I remember getting what I suppose would have been a couple of weeks at the most, because I remember when the ship was going through the lock at the time, they said to me, well, you know, get the taxi driver to bring you to so-and-so lock because we've got to get out while the tide is right. We'll wait for you at the lock. And I caught up with them at the lock. And when they said, is that all the food you've got, I knew that perhaps I hadn't got enough. But I mean, I had no idea. Nobody had told me. In those days, I always thought about this a long while afterwards, that nobody at Blackwall told me what you should really be even thinking of taking out. And we always made sure with supers after that you gave them one of your shopping lists, and they could at least add or subtract to it. There are things that perhaps you like. I mean, a lot of people like those tins of stewed steak or something like that, which I never bothered with. But I mean, it gave you some idea of the sort of quantities that you would have to take out. Anyway, eventually we landed up at Lundy South after one of those interminable journeys down the Bristol Channel doing lightship reliefs, back in and filling. And I remember the boat couldn't get onto the beach for some reason rather, and at that time Lundy South had a hoist. It was a big cable from the top of the cliff, actually in the lighthouse yard, with a box to it, which was low. You could lower down to sea level, and they said, "Oh, you can go up in the box." And I remember one of the crew saying, "You don't have to do that, son. It's bloody dangerous." But I didn't see any harm in it. So lo and behold, I get into this box, and I suppose in retrospect it was probably put there when they built the place, because it was the only way of getting materials virtually from sea level up to the lighthouse, because the other path up was absolutely torturous, apart from very, very hard work. So I dare say that gear was pretty ancient. And there was a little steam engine, a little donkey steam engine that used to had to be stoked up on the morning of relief about 6 or 7 hours before, so you had make sure you had enough steam to bring all the gear up, and that's what the keepers used to use it for, was not so much to bring the personnel up, was you could land on the beach and walk up, but save carrying all your food up. And all the oil, I mean, in those days oil was landed in drums and water was landed in barrels. So that hoist did save you a long climb. I don't know how high Lundy South is above sea level, but it's, must be about 150 foot. Anyway, I got up there and there was a man called Charlie Waghorn, was PK. And Ray somebody or other. His father had been the depot clerk at Harryhead. His name may come to me in a minute. They were very, very good. Charlie Waghorn was one of the old-time PKs who done as little as he possibly could if he could find a younger man to do it, and he did suffer from stomach trouble, and come the time when it was to come and wind up, he always had griping stomach pains until he said, "I'll go and wind up for you, skipper," because it was a very, very heavy wind there. As you know, the lenses were driven by a clockwork mechanism which had to be wound up every hour, and it was a long, long, heavy wind. But I don't blame him when you're a 17-year-old, and he must have been coming on for his 60s, I guess. Certainly into his 50s. That I suppose he felt, why should I go and graft when I've got a youngster here? It was an explosive fog signal, which I didn't like. I never did like bangs. I'm afraid after the war, living in London during the war, I had really a gut full of bangs and thumps and explosions. And I've got to admit that I never did. I didn't mind doing it myself because you knew when the bang was going to come, but I never really ever got used to this quarter of a pound of tonite going off every 3 minutes, and it was quite a crack. And particularly if you were outside. And the more you were waiting for it, the more it made you jump when it happened. This was coming on the winter of 1946 now. I think I went off on Armistice Day 1946, which was November the 11th.
Yes, my name is Mike Williams. We're on Lundy South as I speak now. I've been appointed here for about 3.5 years, and I had a previous spell of 6 years here soon after I joined the job. For this station that I'm on now, I travel to Swansea by rail from home and go straight away to the supermarket after dropping my bags off at my digs, and I do all my shopping in the supermarket. The only food which I take with me is my own homemade muesli. The rest comes from the supermarket, and then I did get a taxi to the Trinity House depot where I start to get it packed up for the next day when the relief is on. And it all has to go in the standard red Albert boxes. And I normally take most of 3 of those boxes.
You now do helicopter reliefs to Lundy. Were you ever on boat reliefs here?
No, a boat relief was always an exception in early days here if the helicopter was offline for quite some time for any reason. Then relief by the THV Winston Churchill was occasionally done, but it was quite rare.
What's it like living on Lundy then?
It's obviously a lot more spacious than the towers or the smaller rocks, and it has the added advantage of being able to see a few different faces other than the crew that I'm on the station with.
And you have your own bedroom, of course?
Yes, that's a big advantage.
Can you say what day-to-day life is like on Lundy, in the Lighthouse?
Yes, the actual routine for working is not dissimilar to that on a tower, except that everything is more spread out. Most of the routine chores, as on most lighthouses, are done by the morning watchman, and these are mostly cleaning chores, but they do include a small amount of light maintenance work, no pun intended.
And this station you do weather reports?
Yes, we do weather reports on Lundy. Those are every 3 hours for the Met Office, and we do some which are roughly every 4 hours for the Coast Guard. The ones for the Coast Guard are in plain language, and the ones for the Met Office are encoded for their computer system.
Lundy North has been automated some years now, and it's part of your duties to go and look after that.
Yes, that's a diminishing duty now, but we haven't yet been told not to go and clean the place up and tidy it a bit. So we're continuing to do so on a more or less monthly basis. And of course we're available still if there are problems there which need sorting out by unskilled people. For the first couple of years or so that I was here when I joined the job, Lundy North was still manned, and there was a little bit of social interaction between the two crews. Members of one crew would go and visit the other station from time to time. And when the station was automated, two of the assistant keepers from Lundy South spent a week at Lundy North training to look after the place under two of the training staff from Blackwall. And then the regular keepers were removed from Lundy North and never returned. From that time, the physical condition of the station went downhill quite rapidly. Things tended to rust and rot, and it was noticeable how the lack of habitation caused the place to degrade, partly because of it was not being heated and it wasn't being regularly ventilated with doors being opened and windows opened. Things had to be shut up for security, and all of this had quite a bad effect, plus the fact that there was nobody there to take preventative measures to prevent things from getting worse.
Explosive foghorns, you've seen a few.
Well, I've seen two types of explosive foghorns. I'm one of the very few keepers that have seen the both types. The type on the rocks was an arm that you wound up above the tower. You put two charges on, a 4-ounce tonite charge. You had the charges and the detonators. You put a detonator in the charge, wound it up to the top of the lighthouse, and in the actual lantern you had a clock. If the fog signal, we say, sent one explosive charge off every 5 minutes, every 5 minutes this clock used to ring a bell. When the bell rang, you pressed the plunger, and that would set the explosive charge off. Now the other unique fog signal, there used to be two at one time in the service. There was one at Limouth Foreland, one at Lundy South. That had a magazine that would hold enough charges for 4 hours. And they had an endless chain. On the chain was hooks that used to pick the charges up out of the magazine, take them up to the end of the arm and fire them. But unfortunately, the one on Lundy in a gale, the actual charge on the end of the arm exploded, but it had blown back and it exploded the second one. That one exploded the third one, and so on, and the complete fog signal blew up.
Lundy was granted to the Knights Templar by Henry II in 1160, but it is unclear if they ever took possession of the island. Ownership was disputed by the Morisco family. Members of the Morisco family and pirates, both English and foreign, took control of Lundy for short periods. There followed more years of turbulent history. Then in 1834, William Hudson Heaven purchased Lundy, and many of the buildings seen there now are from that period. Whilst I was on the island, somebody managed to show me this barn where I had a brief look through the window at some of the artefacts that are destined, hopefully, to go in a small museum on the island. Then later somebody found a key and I was let in to do this brief little video of the lens and other stuff that had been removed from Lundy North Lighthouse. This was the old lens before the one that was in there during my visit. They had to remove the roof of the lighthouse to extract this in pieces. I have since been told that all these pieces are now fully assembled and on display in a small museum on the island. Lundy Old Lighthouse, or the original lighthouse on Lundy, was built in 1819 by Trinity House. The hill it was placed on was eventually called Beacon Hill. It was built by an architect or civil engineer called Alexander. He also designed the lighthouse at South Stack on Anglesey, and he was also responsible for the construction of Dartmoor Prison, would you believe? There's very little to tell you about what the light used to be on this lighthouse. It's a bit confusing, especially to me, because some say it was a quick flashing white light showing every 60 seconds. Or showing every 60 seconds in my mind is not very quick, very, very slow. So I don't know if I believe this or not. The lighthouse was often obscured by mist and fog, so they introduced 2 Georgian 18-pounder cannons which were placed at the base of the tower. And eventually, when this lighthouse was deemed no longer usable, they moved the 2 cannons down to that fog battery further along. Also, to try and get the light under the fog, they built a separate lantern room at the base of the tower. But obviously this often became obscured, and that's why they built the fog signal battery. And now the ex-keepers' cottages can be rented for holidays. And this is the lower lantern at the base of the tower, where they tried to get their light visible under the fog. The Lundy Island battery point or fog gun station was constructed in about 1862/63. During fog, the cannon was fired once every 10 minutes using blanks. And this was replaced by rockets in 1878. There's 2 cottages down there, and at one time it was home to 13 people. This fog battery was constructed because the old lighthouse was quite often obscured by fog, so no use to the shipping. So this was deemed to be the best solution by having this place way down on the western side of the island, closer to the sea. There's a few records of some of the fog signal gunners there. In 1871 there was a John Blackmore and a Thomas Lee. Then in 1881 there was a Thomas Jones and a John Morgan. Then again in 1891 John Morgan again and a James Barry. The building was abandoned when Lundy South and Lundy North were constructed in 1897.
just before Christmas, I had to go and do duty at the North End, North Lundy. Now the ship tried to done the relief at the South End and then steamed around for the North End to do the North End relief, but by then the weather was getting pretty bad. They had the keepers and all the gear in the boat and they couldn't make the landing at the North End, so they went all the way around back onto the ship, unloaded the boat, the motorboat, and took the ship back down to the South End and landed all our gear, all our food at the South End. And this would be about a week, 10 days before Christmas maybe. And the keepers were told to walk across the island, which they duly done, carrying what they could for enough food for at least for a day. Lundy in those days was uninhabited apart from a man called Heasman, who was then the agent for the island. A man called Gade had been the agent before the war, and I think sometime afterwards he came back, I believe, Gade, but I never met him. This man Heasman was the agent for the island, and there was a Scottish farmer. No, he was a Devonian, his wife was Scottish, broad Aberdonian Scot, lovely woman. And they had a daughter who was at school somewhere around about Barnstaple. But there was a tractor of sorts, and the idea was to get all our food, or get the tractor to come down onto the beach at Lundy South. We would get our food down from the lighthouse, and they would bring it across Lundy North to the top, where we would have to ferry it down. But that winter of 1946-47 was one of the severest winters I think we've had in the last 40 years. And a blizzard started blowing up, which went on for weeks. So we eventually had no food, and we were sounding for, well, not fog, but certainly poor visibility. The fog signal was going. And he got to the state and said, well, look, we're going to have to go across. The other keepers, bearing in mind there's only 3 of us, the other 2 keepers, both Welsh. There again, I can't remember their names. Emlyn Williams was one of them. The other one was Richardson, I think. Anyway, they decided that they were going to have to leave me on my own, which was pretty frightening for somebody with virtually no experience at all of machinery, and a dang great diesel engine thundering away there, which they showed me how to go and oil up every hour. And there was a radio beacon, which more or less took care of itself. But they got up in the morning and they dressed themselves up and took haversacks and bags, and they were going to carry enough food for us to last us for as much as they could carry, which they did, and they were gone all day, and they were absolutely exhausted by the time they come back, battling against this through very, very heavy snow. And when you think back on it, it was probably a very, very dangerous trip, because when you walked across Lundy, if I remember rightly, to the 1/4 and 3/4 wall, there was a well-defined path and stones, but with the depth of snow that was on the island, they could have very, very easily lost themselves. And literally walked over the cliff. It nearly happened to me once. And then, I think bit by bit over the month, we gradually got our food back. I remember we spent Christmas Day with this farmer. I think it must have been my day off, which we spent Christmas Day with this farmer and his wife in a very, very draughty house. Len Hart was one of the other keepers that had come up on Lundy South by then. Anyway, I was there for 4 months in all. I'd done 2 months at the South, 2 months at the North, straight off. I had to go from the Lundys, 4 months on Lundy, and I came ashore around about the end of February. And there again, they couldn't make the landing, so we had to carry all our gear to Gannet's Combe and climb down the cliff where the boat could take us off on the lee side of the island. And I remember climbing down Gannet's Combe with all my gear in case, and it wasn't very, very easy. I wouldn't like to have to do it now, and we eventually got taken off.
Now heading back to the base of the tower. There's the green tube you're approaching now, and that used to house a weight hanging down on a wire which drove a clockwork motor round upstairs in the lantern room. That's how the lights of old used to be turned. Now into the service room. There's the controls for the light, and there's the curved wooden cupboard made specially for the lighthouse to fit the walls, and that in days of old would house the mantles and everything to do with the oil light upstairs, but now would be spare light bulbs. The final flight in every lighthouse is always the steepest. Those railings there used to be polished brass, now all painted over because this place is derelict. Everything's been stripped, even the vents, the brass vents on the wall. It's quite a sad looking building inside now. Not like when keepers used to be there. And that's the sad looking grubby lens that's no longer covered in TLC from the keepers. Inside that little doorway there, you've got 3 light bulbs in there. One would be on, one would be standby, and the other is the emergency battery light. So if anything happened to any bulb, it automatically flicks the mechanism round and lights the next bulb. And this is me just turning the thing round by hand, just as a bit of nostalgia, I guess. You can see how grubby it is with no keepers there to look after it. And as the lighthouse and buildings were more or less abandoned, the old fog signal building now doubles as a day room for visiting personnel, mechanics, etc., technicians that are going to be working on the light. So this, for all extents and purposes, is now the lighthouse, or at least it was when I visited. It's all changed again now, I've heard. I think they've revamped the lighthouse itself, parts of it, and put the light back in there. The following photo-stroke slides, supplied by Barry Jones, taken by his stepfather, Robin Hugh Shaley, assistant keeper known as Hugh throughout the lighthouse service. Hugh took these slides while serving at Lundy North Lighthouse. The Lundy letterbox stamps are found all over the island, but I was only interested in those relating to the lighthouses and the gun battery. Just visit the shop on the island for more details.